So Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is it's a network and it's an organization. It's sort of two things in one. Technically, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3 formally, and that allows us to be able to move resources, capital, and do that in a way that's safe and responsible for IRS and tax purposes. And so there's an internal steering committee, there's decision-making apparatuses. Outside of that formal structure, then there's also spokes council calls and conference calls that are open for people to autonomously from their different regions monthly communicate with each other and hash out ideas and talk about what challenges people are going through by way of preparing for and responding to crisis. And beyond that, it's an autonomous network. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, it's a tactic. It's something that people do all of the time, whether they know about this style of organizing or not. We like to say that community organizing is disaster preparedness and disaster response is community organizing as well. And so if you're doing the thing, you're a part of the thing, and that's what we believe in, whether you're freely associating with the network or not.
Well, thank you. Alexa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about maybe what that looks like on the ground. So I can give an example. In Florida, where I'm sort of based out of, hurricanes come more frequently as the climate crisis increases. And so we move on the ground in a way that sort of uplifts the voice of the community that is impacted. So instead of infrastructure or institutions like FEMA or Red Cross that come in and sort of place or prescribe a solution, we use methods and relationships to sort of build relief efforts from the ground up based on what the community needs instead. So we will go in and bring resources like food and water and rebuilding houses and getting houses and things like that, but from a sort of mutual standpoint rather than a prescribed standpoint.
How is that different than a collective or collectivism? Is there a difference?
Between a network and a collective?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a semantic question that I think is really interesting. Yeah. I think if we're talking about a collective, I think we're talking about people who are working in, I think, more close proximity to each other. Whereas Mutual Aid Disaster Relief stretches as far as the Pacific Northwest, down to the Florida coast, Puerto Rico. People were responding autonomously in the wake of Hurricane Maria.
Bahamas.
The Bahamas. We say that we want to keep Mutual Aid Disaster Relief within the container of the so-called United States and its territories, because we don't want to spread ourselves too far and start getting into the territory of responding to other people's crises. We want everything to be in home. And so the so-called United States is a very broad stretch of territory, a lot of occupied land and a lot of different cultures across it. And so I think that the network provides a sort of container for us to have a response model, whereas a collective, I think, is more of a situational, geographic, location-based organization that's built on a common principle and analysis and goal.
Very good. Interesting, yes.
I think it might be interesting to think about it like the network is sort of a network of collectives.
Yeah,
so each
right.
chapter or section would be a collective in itself, and then the network is sort of connecting those to share resources or share information or share, support or whatever it is that we share through it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're keeping yourself within the United States. So I'm trying to get a picture of this. So you must have sort of like hubs or headquarters or what would you call that? Where a unit or a nexus is.
Sure.
Where does that exist? What does that look like?
Yeah.
I know you're both here
Yep.
in the Shawnee, but what does your society look like?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. And honestly, I mean, it's like our friend Jimmy's house. One of our founding members, Jimmy, and his partner Des, they can be found in a lot of media representing Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. I've done a lot of interviews with different groups like Submedia and It's Going Down. They are not the leaders of the network. We have a network that does not operate on sort of a hierarchy. It's completely horizontal. And when I joke and say that, the hub would be Jimmy's house, I mean that because most of the finances and the legal apparatuses began in Florida, in Tampa, where Jimmy and Des are located. And so a lot of those decisions financially are based, like the address of the nonprofit is in Florida and Tampa. But the spokes council comes from across the country. So we don't have any one place that Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is based out of. And that, I think, gives us a lot of power to actually be able to express ourselves in a horizontal way. There isn't a command center for Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. We don't have a membership-based organization, meaning that anyone can identify freely associated with the network. And there aren't formal chapters. People can to call themselves Mutual Aid Society of, insert wherever you're from. Or when we were on the tour last year, we did a West Coast tour. We were passing through Chico, California, and that was 2 weeks before the Paradise Fire hit and decimated that area. And so right when that happened, because we were able to go through and communicate with people on the ground and build relationships and talk about these principles of mutual aid through disaster response, the group North Valley Mutual Aid was formed. And we were in close tandem with them, working through a lot of different issues that they were having logistically and financially and otherwise. And so I think that's more or less wherever the responses are happening are where the hubs are. And so it's more like a mushroom. Things are popping out of the mycelial connections that we have.
So you're talking about a lot of horizontal integration or non-integration, no formal membership. So it's quite organic in that sense. Why now? I mean, people, and I don't want to project my understanding, but people often think of the government coming to help.
Right.
Right. So there seems to. Let me ask you this. There's help being given during times of disaster. Are there other political nuances to this? Or, why not just let the government do it? Right?
Ooh, great question.
That's a great question. And I want to respond to that with a specific example. In Panama City, Florida, when I believe it was Michael hit in 2018, the fall of 2018, there was a lot of donations brought to this one apartment complex, a lot of clothes, right? But these people didn't have their homes. And so to be receiving clothes was sort of like, the intention is good, but it's actually not helpful in any way. And because no one asked them, no one stepped to them and said, what is it that would actually help you in this situation? What can we do for you? They said, here are these things. They ended up burning these piles of clothes in front of their apartment building because they didn't have anywhere to put them or anywhere to keep them. They were getting rained on. It sort of created actually more of a mess for them, and that's something that the government does. They actually are not interested in the needs of the people, specifically marginalized people in a community. They're interested in showing up in a way that shows people outside of the community that they showed up, so-called showed up.
So you're people-centric, community-centric. It's really, I don't want to use the word, but it almost sounds in a way, if I threw out the word anarchistic, does that what do you think? I hear horizontal,
hierarchical.
Right, non-hierarchical.
Yeah.
If I threw out, is this the idea? Anarchism sometimes is thought of as mutual aid, right? So if I threw out the word anarchism, is that something you would just throw your hands up at, or does it have any history with your group?
I think we probably both have views on that. I think the only reason I would have pushback on that is because of the connotation of the word, not because of what it actually means. In theory, I think it would be very similar to an anarchist organization. I think it is anarchistic, but I wouldn't necessarily explain that to someone else. I wouldn't say we are an anarchist organization only because it is a deterrent.
Right, and I use the word anarchistic just in the sense that it is non-hierarchical and it's mutual aid and it's community-based, and you're not picking up the phone and calling people from central services. Right.
Absolutely.
You're not handy. Well, so I don't need to be. So, why the convergence? Why are you here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think before answering that, I would also like to answer the anarchy question.
Oh, sure.
I think I myself identify with the tradition of anarchism. I think that a lot of people simply don't know that anarchism has a long form tradition and legacy, and it takes on a lot of different varieties. There's a lot of different shades of the expression of anarchism. And so I think that in the work that we do, we draw from a lot of those traditions and many others. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is not a political organization in that we don't identify with one tendency. We're a multi-tendency organization that draws from a lot of different relationships and a lot of different traditions that are based in, once again, like Alexa had said, people on the ground who are the most marginalized, who are leading their own recovery. So instead of throwing people into a situation in which there's a saviorism, we're drawing from liberation groups that are already working on the ground who may or may not even agree with us. But if we're able to work together on these common terms and build common ground, that I think is the strength of the network. So, and I honestly believe that that's anarchism, but you know.
So to the question of why the convergence?
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the disasters that we're responding to are increasing due to the climate crisis. And so the concept of mutual aid disaster relief is sort of like very nicely paralleled with climate justice, and it coincides very well. Like mutual aid disaster relief is a huge part of it is direct action on the ground in response to these disasters, but another like aspect of that is creating these parallel resistance of like what other direct actions are we doing to prevent and to sort of push back against the climate crisis that's happening. So that's why, I mean, I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, because our network is so intimately woven into a lot of pre-existing organizations, most people in our network don't identify as like, I'm a mutual aid disaster relief organizer. A lot of us are doing other things. And so, as Alexa said, a lot of us are drawn to the awareness of the impending climate catastrophe that we're living in, and have a groundwork that's based in that response too. So being able to network with a bunch of people from across the country is really powerful, and learning from other people that are doing similar work only builds the movement of mutual aid through disaster response.
Great. Let me ask you this. Are you seeing old friends at the Convergence? Familiar faces?
Yeah. Yeah, we live pretty far apart. We actually only see each other in person very infrequently. So for me, I see a lot of really familiar and...
Are you seeing some new faces?
Absolutely, I think always.
Yeah, a lot of them.
A lot of new faces.
The Convergence was pitched as, this is not a conference. We're having meetings and all this. It was supposed to be a little bit more than a conference. So let me ask you this. What do you think of the Convergence? I mean, is it a little different? I mean, than a conference? Was it? Where would you put it on the conference scale? Where would you? What has it done for you? Did it live up to the hype?
That's a great question, actually. To be honest, I'm not sure I've formed a full opinion yet, but I think there is incredible potential with the structure of this conference because it is like highly based in network building, which, like, to tie it back to mutual aid disaster relief, is a network that is the core structure of the organization, is to build a network and build solidarity across geography or culture, or, whatever it is. So I think there's a lot of power and potential in the structure, and I think it's exciting to see as like day 3, it's sort of working itself out a little bit more, and day 1 and day 2 sort of like working through little like creaks and crinkles and wrinkles. And today I've sort of seen it blossom a little bit more and heard a little different feedback and experienced a difference within a workshop of like, oh yeah, this is moving. This is actually like what we wanted. This is like, we had to lay the groundwork for the last 2 days, and now we're getting into like the point. So I guess for me, it's like I see the potential in it quite a bit.
Yeah. I think that whenever you get a situation where you have people who are coming from a lot of different practices and tendencies, whether they be on the left or anywhere else on the political spectrum, you're going to have a lot of creative tension And I've been to a lot of different events where there's a lot of political tension and diversity of tactics and ideologies, in which like the first thing that people want to do at these kind of conferences is build a collective points of unity for a larger overarching organization. And that just like always ends in some kind of catastrophic failure. And I think that for this event to have a more casual approach towards relationship building still has all of the tension of having a bunch of different people on the left with a lot of different tendencies and historical differences, and you have an age gap as well. You have people who are very old in the movement who have seen a lot, and you have people who are just beginning on their journeys through revolutionary direct action. And so having all of these different cultures and spaces and genders and geographies and tendencies and tactics and ideologies all in one space inevitably is going to be a melting pot. And there's going to be, a lot of spice in that mix. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of that here. And to be a representative of an organization at an event like this is humbling to be here. And also, I think, allows us open room for, critique.
Yeah.
So, started forests, climate, colonialism, racism, ageism, sexism, on and on. Do you think people have been well represented? Has there been seats at the table? You talk about had a kind of a clunky start in a way, for some maybe. How do you think about the representation? I'm asking for an honest appraisal. Do you think has it evolved since the start? Now, I'm not saying the start was difficult, but there was concerns about maybe missing sex trafficking wasn't being addressed. So, do you have any perspectives on how that kind of worked out? Are people finding spaces to speak about their issues?
That's a good question. I think that's a little bit hard for me to answer because I'm not sure that I know all of the representation that is here. But from what I experienced, I also think that it was presented in a way that was like, we are going to sit down and talk about the nitty-gritty, like a lot of times logistical things and the things that we need to come together and talk about together, because we have this like separation from each other to create a cohesive movement. We have to come together and have these really logistical and really like, I don't want to say intense because it's not always emotionally intense, but it is very intensive. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it does seem like that's what's happening. And I think in any convergence, conference, you're never going to be able to represent all of the different topics that are related to, for example, in this case, climate crisis. It would be very difficult, I think, to address each of those. And I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's my perspective, I guess. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I know that like the Institute for Social Ecology, the ISE, back in the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s was doing like month-long conferences where people were able to talk about social ecology and like all of the different structures of organizing from an ecologically liberatory perspective, and like having that kind of time and intensivity to be able to hash a lot of these subjects out seems a lot more appealing, but like infinitely more, if not like unimaginably more daunting. How is it that you could take a month off from work? So like just being here in this space right now for a lot of people means something. It's logistically and materially important for people to come all of the distance that they've traveled to come into a space like this to hash out these ideas. So there's a little bit of a tension there of like the abundance of ideas and tensions, and then there's also the scarcity of time and resources to facilitate the fullness of what is needed to have the conversations to actually come to conclusions and solutions that feel fulfilling. So I think that at these kind of events, there's always that like that hope at the end and relationships that are built, and conversations that are had that spark new ideas and new tracks of mind, and hopefully some solutions come out of that, or at least new tactics and skill shares. But I think inevitably at the end of these kind of things, after 4 days, we're only just getting started.
Great answer for me. I wanted to also ask you, just on a broader scale. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the impending climate crisis. You're saying that you're talking about how there's increased, or there's more need for responses because of climate issues. Hopeful? I mean, what does the future look like? You guys are relatively young. I'm one of the old guys here, right? So, I mean, hopeful? I mean, what, going forward, why are you doing this?
Yep.
I mean, if you listen to most people, it's not going to make a difference. I'm just going to say, if I was most people, I'd say, what can you do about it?
Yep.
Are you hopeful?
Do you want to take the first one on that?
Sure. I mean, to the subject of the hopelessness of what it is that we're up against, the insurmountable odds of being able to even just analyze what it is that we're up against. I mean, it's one thing to understand that there's national corporations that are behind the scenes, pulling the strings on different nation states to allow the oil extraction and the extraction of water and the assassination of indigenous people in their communities to remove them from land. And the whole history of colonization and feudalism and the expression of that through the contemporary neoliberal capitalism. Like, I can go on and on and on about all of the things that I know on the surface level of my analysis of what's happening, but the names of the people who are behind those things, the geographic territories that they occupy and the powers that they have within different regions, this is where it becomes much more complicated, and that's where it becomes hopeless, I think, for a lot of people, because it's so much to digest at once. So I think the power of being at an event like this allows us to be able to collectively dream and bring the wisdom of the movement into a space and distill it so that we can have more of an analysis that's based in reality. And my hope, I think personally, as an individual, not necessarily a representative of mutual aid disaster relief, is that we're able to build small municipal groups that are able to have a socially, ecologically based perspective through direct aid and mutual aid in communities. If we can meet each other's material needs, transportation, health, energy, food, decision-making apparatuses, how is it that we're healing ourselves mentally and emotionally as well? All of this is very daunting in and of itself to the backdrop of capitalism and climate catastrophe. So I believe that the small municipal approach is the one that I think is going to be the interconnected, mycological mushroom kind of like popping up of these different organizations and amalgamations of society network that's going to get us through whatever catastrophe comes next, because we're going to have a lot that we're going to have to navigate. We're seeing our comrades in Rojava right now navigating the onslaught of nation states and of terrorist organizations and genocide. We have our comrades in Chiapas who have been expanding their municipalities because of a necessity to sustain an ongoing movement of resistance against the nation state and against multinational corporations. So I think that if we're looking at these different examples of resistance from indigenous people across the planet, we see, I think, a glimpse into what the future could potentially look like. And it isn't always a happy one, but I think that there's celebration through resistance. I think that we build networks of care, and I think that we go as long and hard as we can, and we build space for the next generation to inherit something that has a little bit of a lineage and some hope.
Yeah, I think... Sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, that's it. We're fucked.
I think you hit on a really good point about like the next creating space for the next generation, and that's where me personally, like my internal drive comes from. I'm a teacher for young folks, and the other part of mutual aid disaster relief that I like to work with is curriculum building and like popular education and creating access to that education and stuff like that. So for me, my drive and hope comes from like, that's where I think direct action is like educating folks and giving them the information and creating access to information and skills and to resources and like creating infrastructure so that it sustains. And that for me, that's like through youth, but then also it has to be through adult education as well. And sort of like I use this analogy of a tree, and so like pull the roots, trim the branches is a common one that people use, but I also use plant the seeds. So like all three of those things have to happen in order for like a whole future to exist for me. And so like my hope and motivation comes from the planting seeds part, as well as the direct action of cutting branches and then the restructuring that is pulling roots. But
Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I think I want to backtrack to last year on the West Coast and into the Plain States in the Midwest, and on the West Coast and once again into the Plain States and into the Midwest. We did 2 different tours that were both 3 months long. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief was going around and doing these 2-day long intensive storytelling and hands-on workshops where people were learning about the narrative of from the Common Ground movement after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans to the Occupy Sandy movement, to the response to the Baton Rouge floods, and even relief at Standing Rock, how resources were being and decision-making structures were being transmitted through this like common narrative of aid through crisis, industrial, social, political, and environmental. And so we were talking to communities about this really intensively, and I got to see so much of the country and so much of what people are doing, and was inspired by that. And having spent 6 months of it on the road with a really solid team of people really changed my life and my directorial stance on where I want to go with my organizing at home. And it doesn't stop there. There have been other smaller autonomous trainings that have gone on, and there's a Northeast training that's in the works right now.
yeah, we're about to go on tour right after this. We're going to go through the Northeast, like Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts, and it's about 3 weeks, and there's a small group of us as trainers and facilitators that will do pretty similar workshop. We're like working through the curriculum. We change it as we go along, but yeah, so that's something that's coming up in the future that we're excited about, and we like to learn from it and build off of it. And yeah, you can find information about it on the, an Instagram page. It's MADR_tour is the handle of it, and you can follow the previous tours and then also the upcoming tour. And we have information about Matter and uplifting other movements and mutual aid, stuff like that.
Yeah, and for more information, you can follow mutualaiddisasterrelief.org. And we have a lot of updates and resources available there as well, and multimedia.
Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been so fun. And I'll tell you what, that's the high IQ rock right there.